Hi, this is the video lecture on using graphical techniques to display distribution. Throughout the course, we're going to talk about three concepts. The first one is distribution, and then for those distributions, there's center of the distribution and the spread. We'll talk about center and spread next week, but this week we're going to talk about distribution. So, first of all, what is a distribution? It's any way of showing all the possible values of a variable. It can be for the population or the sample, and how often they occur. The distributions look different based on how many possible values there are of the variable. The first ones we're going to look at are ones that have only a few possible values. For example, this would be hypothetically some results of an exit poll on election day, where we asked people how many elections out of the past 4 did you participate. And these are our results. So we had 3 people who said they participated in 1 election out of the last 4. We have 5 people who said 2, etc. Okay, so that's our raw data. We'll start with that. This is a table of the values. So all we did was we went through and we said there are 4 possible values, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we counted the frequency. So this is just a tally. We had 3 1s, 5 2s, 10 3s, and 2 4s. And then to get the relative frequencies, we just said there are 20 observations. So 3 out of 20 is 15%. 5 out of 20 is 25%, 10 out of 20 is half, and then 2 out of 20 is 10%. Okay? And again, this is for a sample. We could look at something similar for a population, and we will in a couple of weeks. Okay, so now let's do, this is the relative frequency distribution. So if or when on the homework they ask you for the distribution, whether the frequency or the relative frequency, this is what they're asking for. Okay, so now let's talk about how to generate a graph based on that. So I'm going to X out of here and go over to my stat lab. So from our My Stat Lab page, we're going to click on StatCrunch and visit the StatCrunch website. Open StatCrunch. And we're going to start by typing in the variables we had. Okay, so first of all, this was election data. And we had some 1s, some 2s, some 3s, and some 4s. And I'm going to pause the video for just a sec and type in the rest of the data. Okay, so I've typed in all this data, and all we have to do is go to Stat, actually it's Graph, bar plot. And this is a bar plot because we want to have a category for each value here, 1 through 4. So bar plot, and what we have is data. We're going to take this variable and move it over. And we'll leave everything the same, except let's look at relative frequencies instead of just frequencies. So we'll click Compute, and that gives us our graph. Okay, so we're calling this a histogram, even though it's technically a bar graph. All right, so I'm going to ask you on your homework to copy and paste this over into a Word document. So to do that, let's go to Options, Copy, and if you hover down here, it'll tell you how to copy and paste. So right-click, Copy Image, and then it says paste special and paste as device independent bitmap. So I'm going to paste this here. So Control Alt V, and pick device independent bitmap. Okay, so we're just going to put that right over here. You can shrink this down if you want to, just like I'm doing. All right, so now we're looking at the bar chart, the histogram. And I'll tell you that in your book, they draw this just a little bit differently. They have the bars touching, and I guess technically they should be, but that's okay. We won't make a big deal out of it. So what this shows us is that the most common is that people participated in 3 elections, followed by 2, followed by 1, and then the least common is that they participated in all 4 of the previous 4 elections. All right, so that's when there really are only a few possible values, so few that you can really list them all. Let's look at a different type of distribution. That's when you've got more possible values than you want to list. So I made up this data set, which might be a sample of the ages of women who were prescribed hormone replacement therapy. You can see here we've got a lot of different possible values for the variable. They range from the lowest, I believe, is 38, and the highest is 62. So you're not going to want to list all of those values. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to create a grouped frequency distribution. So to do that, we've categorized them. So we've grouped them so that we're starting with 35 to 39, 40 to 44, 45 to 49, etc. These categories, the way we're talking about them, these categories start at 35 and they're of width 5. So what that means is the lowest category starts at 35, so starting at 35, and width 5 means that the next category is 5 higher than that. Okay, this is where people make mistakes, so pay close attention. This looks like it's width 4, but it's really width 5. So 35, 36, 37, 38, and 39. That's five values. Okay? So please do it this way. Don't say 35 to 40, 41 to 45, or something like that. Okay? So the categories being 5 apart, again, means that the lower limits are 5 apart. And we just go through and do a tally of the values and see that there's 1 value in the 35 to 39 range, 6 in the 40 to 44, etc. Okay? So here we just talk about that. In terms of how we choose the category widths, or the category parameters there, it would not be incorrect to start at some other value. I like to start at nice round numbers. But for our purposes, I'm just going to tell you what to start at and what category width to use. Okay? One thing to keep in mind is that histograms and all graphical techniques is really just to give a snapshot view of the data. So you really want to just be able to take a quick glance, and I think it's a little bit easier to look at graphs where things are nice round numbers. It won't be that way in SPSS, and it won't be that way in some graphs you see, but that's just my personal preference. All right, so again here I'm just talking about those things that we talked about a minute ago. You can pause and read these if you want. So let's go and actually create that histogram. So I'm going to go back to the raw data, and I'm going to X out of here and go to StatCrunch. And I'm going to type in this data. And again, I'm just going to pause this video and type in the data, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, so I've typed in this data. I recommend always double checking your data entry, because data entry will get you every time. And I want to show you real quick something you can do that'll help you actually do the relative frequency distribution. So if you go to Data, Sort, and just take your data, take your variable, move it over, and click Compute, it'll sort that data for you, and that makes it a whole lot easier to do the relative frequency distribution. All right, so now to do the histogram itself, we just go to Graph, Histogram. I'm going to take the variable, move it over. Let's do the relative frequencies. And we said we wanted to start it at 35 and have a width of 5. Okay? And we'll leave everything else the same, and we'll just click Compute, and that gives us our histogram. Let's copy it, and I'm going to copy image, and I'm going to paste it over here into the PowerPoint. Right here. Oops, I didn't follow the instructions. So Control-Alt-V, device independent bitmap, and there we go. All right, so that's the histogram. So the histogram is basically a bar chart of those relative frequencies that we found. Important things to look for is that here on the x-axis, what you see is the values of the variable that we're looking at, in this case the age of somebody getting hormone replacement therapy. So those are values increasing from least to greatest. And then up here are relative frequencies. So this shows you where the most common values are, where the least common values are, and then everything else in between. So this gives you an idea of the shape of the distribution. This one looks like it's fairly symmetric and fairly what we call bell-shaped, and more on that in just a minute. So let's talk a little bit more about how to make the categories in the relative frequency distribution table. So pause the video for a sec and come up with what you think the categories would be if you were asked to create categories of width 10 that started at 50. And then what would be the categories if you were asked to create categories of width 20 starting at 500. All right, and actually now is a good time to cut off part 1 of the video, and we'll create part 2 in just a sec. All right, so go ahead and do that. I'll start part 2 because I can only make these videos 15 minutes at a time. All right.